The paper was still curling at the corner from the copier tray when I set it on the kitchen counter, right between the mail Wade hadn't opened and the coffee mug he'd left there that morning. He came in through the mudroom the way he always did, boots first, jacket second, still talking about a log truck stuck at the scale house before he even looked down and saw it sitting there. He went quiet in a way I had never once heard him go quiet. I watched him read it. I watched his eyes move to the county seal in the corner, then to his own name printed in that flat official font, then to a name that was not mine sitting right next to his on the line that said spouse. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. "Where'd you get this?" he said, and it wasn't really a question. It was the sound of a man buying himself 3 seconds. Grays Harbor County Auditor's Office has a website now, Wade. Anybody can search it. Took me 4 minutes. "Dana," he set his lunch cooler down on the floor, slow, like the sound of it might set something off. "I can explain this." "Then explain it. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at the certificate again instead of at me, and that told me more than anything he could have said. 22 years, I'd watched that man's face do exactly what it was doing now, and I knew the difference between him working up an apology and him working up a story. "It's not what it looks like," he said, which is a sentence that only ever means it is exactly what it looks like. I want to tell you the rest of that kitchen conversation, the part where he tried 3 different versions of the truth before he landed anywhere close to it, but I'm getting ahead of things. I do that. Let me pull back for 1 second. If you're new here, I tell stories like this one most weeks, the kind that start with something small and rotten you almost missed and end up somewhere you never could have guessed walking in. This is one of the harder ones I've sat with. If that's the kind of thing that keeps you coming back, go ahead and hit subscribe, because I've got a lot more where this came from. Okay, back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you know who I was before that piece of paper landed on my counter. My name's Dana. I'm 41 years old, and until about 5 months before that night, I would have told you I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. A good one. The kind that survives because both people keep showing up even on the days they don't feel like it. I work as a physical therapist at an outpatient clinic off Cooper Point Road in Olympia, the kind of place where I spend my days telling retired ferry workers and teenage soccer players to hold a stretch for 30 seconds when they'd rather be anywhere else. I'm good at reading bodies. I can watch somebody walk across a room and tell you which hip is compensating for the other one before they say a word. I used to think that meant I was good at reading people too. I know better now. Wade and I met when I was 19 at a bonfire out past Delphi Road that a girl from my anatomy class dragged me to. He was 22 then, working his first season at a mill up near Shelton, and he had this way of listening like whatever you were saying was the only interesting thing happening in the state of Washington. We got married 3 years later at the courthouse downtown, then had a real ceremony that August at a friend's place on Hood Canal, folding chairs in the grass and a card table of casseroles and a borrowed tent in case the weather turned. Because in Western Washington, the weather always turns eventually. He worked his way up over the years to foreman at Cedar Bend Lumber, a mill outside Shelton that's been running since before either of us was born. It's steady work, union work, the kind that lets you build an actual life instead of just surviving one paycheck to the next. He'd come home smelling like fresh-cut fur and diesel, peel off boots that had seen better decades, and tell me about whatever piece of equipment had given him grief that day. We bought a little rambler off Boston Harbor Road with a view of the water if you stood at just the right angle in the yard and squinted. We raised 2 kids there. Both of them are grown now, out of the house, one in Bellingham and one down in Vancouver. So when I say I thought I had a good marriage, I mean I had 20 years of Tuesday nights and grocery runs and him falling asleep in his recliner during the Mariners game to back that up. I wasn't a fool. I was just a woman who trusted the man she'd built an actual life with. The first thing that didn't fit came in April, on a Sunday when I was doing laundry and found a receipt balled up in the pocket of his work jacket. A hotel off Highway 101, out past Aberdeen. $89 one night, paid in cash. I didn't think much of it at first. Mill guys sometimes get stuck out that way for equipment pickups, deliveries, whatever. But Wade hadn't mentioned a trip to Aberdeen. And when I brought it up over dinner casual, the way you'd mention you found a stray sock, he barely looked up from his plate. Guy I know needed help hauling a trailer. Wasn't worth driving back that night. Fine, reasonable, I let it go. Except then it happened again in May. A different hotel, same stretch of highway, same cash payment. And in June, I noticed his phone had started living face down on the nightstand instead of just sitting there like it always had. And he'd started stepping out onto the back porch to take calls he used to just take standing right next to me in the kitchen. I want to be honest with you about something. Part of me knew before I let myself know. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house when something's wrong, and I'd started hearing it under everything, under the dishwasher running and the TV going and his voice asking how my day was. A low hum underneath the ordinary sounds. I told myself it was stress. I told myself 44-year-old men get restless sometimes, and it doesn't have to mean the whole thing's rot. By July, I'd stopped telling myself anything and started paying attention instead. I started noticing the drive time. Wade would leave for a supposed job site and be gone 6-7 hours longer than the work should have taken. I started noticing he'd changed his phone passcode, which he'd never bothered doing in 20 years of marriage. I started noticing that when his sister called the house looking for him on a Saturday he was supposedly working, he called her back within the hour with an answer ready, smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. The receipts kept coming. August, September, always that same stretch of coastline, always cash. I started keeping a little list on the back page of my planner, dates and amounts, not because I had a plan yet, but because some part of me already knew I'd need it. In October, I finally did something about it instead of just watching it happen. I told Wade I was heading down to Vancouver to help our daughter with a move, which was even true, just not the whole truth, because I left 2 days earlier than I told him, and I drove myself out to Aberdeen instead. I found the hotel easy enough. Small place off the highway, the kind with a laminated continental breakfast sign and a parking lot half full of log trucks and pickups. I sat in my car across the street for the better part of an afternoon feeling like a stranger in my own life. And then I did something I'm not particularly proud of and also don't regret one bit. I went inside and asked the girl at the front desk, straight out, whether a Wade Kessler had ever stayed there. She wasn't supposed to tell me anything. Hotels have rules about that. But she was maybe 22 years old, and something in my face must have told her exactly what kind of question this really was, because she typed something into her computer, went pale, and said, real quiet, that she probably shouldn't say, but that name came up a lot, and usually with a woman. I drove home that night without confronting anybody. I needed to know more before I said a word, because I've learned that people like Wade are good at rewriting a story the second you hand them the first sentence of it. That's when I remembered something from my own PT license renewal a few years back, how so many official records in this state, marriage licenses included, are public and searchable if you know which county to check and you're not afraid to spend an evening on it. I started with Grays Harbor, since that's where all the receipts pointed, and on the second search, sitting at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night with Wade asleep down the hall, I found a marriage record from 3 years earlier. Wade Allen Kessler, married in Grays Harbor County to a woman named Renee Marie Voss. 3 years earlier, which meant 3 years earlier, he was already married to me. I sat there a long time just looking at the screen, waiting for my body to catch up to what my eyes had already told it. My hands were doing something strange, a fine tremor, the same kind I'd see sometimes in stroke patients at the clinic, and it took me a full minute to realize it was just me. Just my own hands, shaking on their own, like they'd gotten the news before the rest of me had. I printed it. I don't fully know why, except that some instinct told me paper doesn't lie the way people do. I kept digging that night instead of sleeping, because once I started, I couldn't make myself stop. I found Renee Voss on a social media page that hadn't been set to private, and the very first photo on it stopped my breath in my chest. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting on Wade's shoulders on some dock somewhere, both of them laughing at whatever the person behind the camera had said. The caption underneath called him Daddy. 22 years of my life, and I was looking at a man I had never actually finished meeting. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to him listening to him breathe, slow and even, a man with nothing on his conscience keeping him up, and I ran through every option I had. Some part of me wanted to shake him awake right then and demand the truth. A bigger part of me, the part that spends all day teaching people to be patient with their own healing, told me to wait until I actually had something he couldn't talk his way around. So the next morning, once he'd left for the mill, I sat down at the table with my laptop and pulled a full credit report. I hadn't looked closely at one in years. Wade had always handled the bills, and I'd never had a reason not to trust that. There it was, third item down. An auto loan out of a credit union in Aberdeen, 18 months old, my name listed right alongside his as a joint borrower on a truck I had never seen, never signed for, never once heard him mention. $61,000. I called the credit union before I let myself think too hard about it, gave them my name, my social security number, told them I was trying to understand a loan on my report I didn't remember signing. The woman on the phone was kind about it in a way that made it worse. The way people are kind when they can tell you're about to hear something that's going to rearrange your whole life. She said the loan had my signature on the application. She said it had been notarized. She offered to send me a copy. I sat there staring at my own name in handwriting I didn't recognize as mine, because it wasn't mine. It was a decent forgery, close enough to fool a stranger behind a counter, but I'd signed my name on insurance forms and mortgage papers and school permission slips for 20 years, and I knew my own hand. That wasn't it. That was the moment something in me stopped being hurt and started being something colder and steadier. I want to tell you it felt like rage, and some of it was, but underneath the rage was something closer to clarity. My husband hadn't just built a second family 60 miles from our front door. He'd forged my name to help pay for it. I spent the rest of that week being very, very quiet. I requested copies of the loan documents. I pulled our joint bank statements going back 2 years and started highlighting withdrawals I couldn't account for, cash advances, transfers to an account I didn't recognize. I made copies of everything and drove them to my sister's place in Lacey rather than keep them in our house, because by then I didn't trust that house to keep my own secrets safe from him the way it always used to keep his safe from me. I thought about calling a lawyer right then. Instead, I made myself wait one more day because I wanted to see his face when I finally asked him about it, wanted to know if there was anything left in him that would tell me the truth without being cornered into it first. Friday evening, I heard his truck turn into the driveway a little after 6, tires crunching over the gravel the way they always did, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't nervous about anything he might say. I'd spent 5 months being the one who didn't know. That was about to change, and some small, hard part of me was almost looking forward to watching him find that out. I'd already printed the marriage certificate. It was sitting on the counter, corner still curling from the copier, right where I'd left it. I heard the mudroom door open. I heard him kick off his boots the way he always did. And I stood there in my own kitchen, waiting for a man I'd loved for over half my life to walk in and see exactly how much I already knew. "It's not what it looks like," he said again, like repeating it might make it true the second time. "Then tell me what it looks like, Wade. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you married another woman 3 years ago and never bothered mentioning it to your actual wife." He ran a hand down his face, and for a second I watched him try on 3 different men before he picked one to be. Not the apologetic one, not the angry one. He landed on tired, like I was the unreasonable party here for asking. "Her name's Renee," he said, finally quiet. "It's complicated." "It is not complicated. You either married her or you didn't." "I did." He said it like it cost him something, and I remember thinking, good, let it cost you something, because I've been paying for it without knowing the price for 3 years. I asked him how a man legally married in the state manages to stand in front of a county clerk and sign paperwork saying he's free to marry when he's got a wife and a mortgage and 2 kids' worth of school photos on the wall 45 minutes up the highway. He didn't have a real answer for that. He said something about a courthouse that didn't check as hard as people think, about Renee not knowing, about it starting as something small that he told himself he'd end before it became what it became. I let him talk. I'd learned that much from 20 years of marriage counseling sessions we never actually had. Sometimes the fastest way to the truth is to stop asking questions and just let a guilty man keep filling the silence. He told me about the daughter. Her name is Sadie. She just turned 5. He told me like it was a confession that might soften something, and I understood then that some part of him genuinely believed I'd find a way to forgive this if he just explained it gently enough. That was the moment I stopped seeing my husband and started seeing a stranger wearing 22 years of my memories like a borrowed coat. "There's one more thing," I said, and I pulled the folder out from under the certificate. The credit report, the loan documents, the bank statements with their yellow highlighter lines. He went pale in a way the bigamy hadn't managed. $61,000, Wade, in my name, with my signature on it, except it isn't my signature, is it? He didn't answer that one. He didn't have to. His silence answered it better than anything he could have said, and I watched a man who'd spent 30 seconds ago trying to make himself sound like a misguided romantic realize he'd just been caught doing something with an actual legal name for it. "Dana, I was going to pay it off before you ever." "Stop talking." I said it quiet, which scared him more than if I'd shouted, I could tell. "I need you to hear me. I am not going to stand in this kitchen and negotiate the terms of how badly you've wrecked my life. I already know everything I need to know." I told him to sleep in the spare room. I didn't sleep myself, not really, but I spent the night doing something more useful than crying, which was making a list. Everything I needed to do in order, the way I'd tell a patient to approach a recovery that felt too big to look at all at once. One step, then the next one. Monday morning, I called a family law attorney downtown, a woman named Carol Ibsen who'd handled my neighbor's divorce a few years back and had a reputation for not letting anybody push her clients around. I sat in her office and laid the whole thing out, the receipts, the marriage record, the forged loan, and watched her expression shift from professional neutral to something sharper. "You understand this isn't just a divorce case," she said. "Bigamy's a felony in this state. And forging your signature on a loan application, that's identity theft, that's fraud, that's a separate matter for the prosecutor's office entirely." I told her I wanted it done right. Not messy, not loud, not some scene in a parking lot that would only give Wade something to spin into a story about his unhinged wife. I wanted it documented, filed, and handled by people whose job it was to handle it. Carol helped me file for legal separation that week, along with an annulment petition, since as far as the law was concerned, my marriage to Wade had never technically been in question, but Renee's marriage to him absolutely was, given that he'd still been legally bound to me the whole time. She also pointed me toward the county prosecutor's office to report the bigamy, and toward the credit union's fraud department to make the forged loan official and on the record. The credit union moved fast once I gave them everything. Within 2 weeks, they'd opened an internal fraud investigation, pulled the notarized signature page, and confirmed what I already knew, that the notary stamp on the document belonged to a mobile notary service Wade had used once, years back, for something else entirely, and that the signature underneath it had never once been mine. The hardest call I made that whole month wasn't to a lawyer or a bank. It was to Renee. I debated it for days. Carol told me I didn't owe her anything, that the courts would sort out the legal side regardless of whether I ever spoke to her directly. But I kept thinking about that photograph, Sadie on Wade's shoulders on some dock, both of them laughing, and I thought about how I would want somebody to tell me, if the situation were reversed, instead of letting me find out from a subpoena. I found her number through a mutual contact on that same social media page and called her on a Tuesday evening. She picked up sounding wary, the way you sound when a strange number calls twice. I told her who I was. I told her as plainly and as gently as I could manage that Wade Kessler had married her while still legally married to me, that our marriage had never ended, not on paper, not anywhere that counted. The silence on her end went on so long I thought the call had dropped. "He told me you two had been divorced for years," she finally said, and her voice had gone thin and strange. "He told me the paperwork just hadn't gone through the county system yet because of some backlog." I believed her instantly, because I recognized the shape of it. It was the exact kind of half-true, patched-together story he'd have used on me if our positions had been swapped. We stayed on the phone almost an hour that night, two women who'd never met, piecing together 5 years of a man's lies from opposite ends of the same lie, and by the end of it, neither of us was angry at each other. We were just two people who'd both married the same liar and never known it. Renee ended up cooperating with the prosecutor's office once she understood what her own marriage actually was under the law. That mattered more than I expected it to. It meant the case against Wade wasn't just me and a folder of bank statements. It was 2 women, 2 marriage certificates, and a timeline that didn't leave much room for him to talk his way out of it. The mill found out before the trial date ever got set, because that's how small towns work, timber country most of all. Somebody at the courthouse mentioned it to somebody who knew somebody at Cedar Bend Lumber, and within a week Wade wasn't foreman of anything anymore. I heard later, from a woman I used to carpool with whose husband still worked the yard, that the day it came out, Wade was standing at the scale house checking a load ticket when 2 sheriff's deputies walked up across the gravel in full view of the whole crew, and that the mill went so quiet you could hear the log trucks idling clear across the lot. I wasn't there for that part. I didn't need to be. I'd spent 5 months being the only person who didn't know what was happening in my own marriage, and there was something almost peaceful about not needing to witness the moment it finally caught up to him. I'd already had mine, standing in my kitchen with a curling piece of paper between us. He pleaded guilty in the end, to the bigamy and to a reduced fraud charge on the loan, rather than push it to trial. I decided to be there for that part. Carol tried to talk me out of it at first, said plenty of her clients found it easier to let the paperwork handle itself without sitting through the actual hearing. But I told her I'd spent 5 months not being in the room when things that mattered to my own life were happening. I wasn't missing this one. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, fluorescent light, worn blue carpet, a clock on the wall that ran 2 minutes fast. Wade came in wearing a collared shirt I recognized from a Christmas years back, and he didn't look at me until they called his name, and when he finally did, I didn't look away. I'd spent 22 years being the one who looked away first in every hard conversation we ever had. I wasn't doing that anymore. The judge read the charges out loud, plain and unhurried, bigamy and identity theft, like she was reading a grocery list, and there was something almost merciful about how ordinary she made it sound, like this was just one more Tuesday case on a docket full of them, which I suppose it was. Wade said guilty twice, once for each charge, and his voice cracked on the second one in a way that might have moved me once. It didn't anymore. The judge gave him supervised probation, restitution to the credit union, and a permanent record that's going to follow him into every job application he ever fills out again in this state. It wasn't prison. I'd stopped expecting or even wanting that somewhere around the 3rd week of watching this whole thing move through the system. What I wanted was for it to be true, on paper, in a courtroom, in front of people whose job it is to write things down and make them official. And it is. The annulment went through a month after that. Legally, it's almost like that second marriage never existed at all, except that it did, and there's a little girl in Hoquiam who's going to grow up carrying the weight of that, whether the courts ever put her name on a single document or not. I sold the Rambler off Boston Harbor Road that spring. Couldn't stand looking at that kitchen counter anymore, honestly, even after I'd repainted the whole room. I found a smaller place closer to downtown Olympia, walking distance to Percival Landing, and some mornings I'll take my coffee down there and watch the fishing boats come in against the gray water and just breathe for a minute before work. I still see patients every week off Cooper Point Road. I still know which hip is compensating for the other one before a person says a word. But I've started noticing something else now too, something I never used to look for. I notice when somebody's whole body is holding a secret the way mine was for longer than I want to admit. I can't always help with that part. But I recognize it now, and some days, that recognition is its own kind of use. I think about that piece of paper sometimes, still curling at the corner, sitting on a counter that doesn't belong to me anymore. I think about how small it looked for something that ended up unraveling 22 years in under a month. It's funny what it takes sometimes. Not a big dramatic scene, just one piece of paper, and a woman finally willing to look straight at what it said instead of looking away from it one more time. If you've ever had a moment like that, one small thing that cracked a whole life wide open, I'd genuinely like to hear about it in the comments below. And if this is the kind of story that stays with you a little after it's over, That's exactly what we do here at Casterly Payback, so stick around. There's more where this came from.